Welcome to the Fast Mode Studios. I'm Tara Neal, and with me today is Masarra Mohamed, Senior Research Analyst, Communications Platform as a Service CPaaS at IDC, and Kunal Shukla, SVP and GM, Head of Networks API at Vonage. IDC is a leading global provider of market intelligence, advisory services, and events for the IT, telecommunications, and consumer technology markets. Masarra leads IDC's global CPaaS research and advisory practice, shaping the firm's perspective on API-driven communications, customer engagement platforms, and their convergence with contact center and UC&C ecosystems. Vonage, a part of Ericsson, creates technology that empowers enterprises and equips developers to lead in the next era of digital transformation. At Vonage, Kunal is responsible for accelerating global growth and market leadership for the company's network-powered solutions, delivering secure, mobile-first, and AI-driven digital user experiences and outcomes for enterprises and developers. Masarra and Kunal join us today to discuss how digital identity fraud is evolving, why traditional authentication methods are falling short, and how network APIs can help create more secure, trusted, and scalable identity verification across the digital ecosystem. Welcome, guys. Great to have both of you on today's episode.
Thank you, Tara, for having us.
Thank you, Tara, for having us.
Awesome. Okay, so we are going to dissect this very interesting topic, and I'm going to begin with my question to Masarra. So, how is online identity fraud evolving, and why is the bigger issue becoming not the attackers but the cyber defenses tasked at hand?
Thank you so much, Tara. Okay, so online identity fraud is evolving in three main ways, if I can cluster them. Firstly, it is becoming more automated and scalable. So fraud is no longer only about an individual attacker stealing a password or intercepting an OTP. So we're now seeing a much more industrialized fraud environment. So attackers can use automation, breach data, synthetic identity, social engineering, and more increasingly, even AI generated content to test and manipulate identity signals at scale. And secondly, is because fraud is becoming more convincing. So attackers are not always trying to look suspicious, they are trying to look more legitimate, if I can say. They might have the correct password, access to personal information, or enough behavioral context to pass the traditional checks. So it's like it makes it statistic identity methods that we usually have, such as the password and OTP and knowledge-based verification, much more less effective on their own right now. And thirdly is because the customer journey within itself, it became a lot more fragmented these days. So consumer are interacting with banks, retails, healthcare provider, public sector, and digital platforms across so many channels and devices. So every login, account recovery, payments approval, password reset, or the customer service interactions we have, they become a potential point of fraud or potential point of risk. So the bigger challenges that we have is not just the attackers you mentioned, it is that many cyber defense model were designed for a different era, much more different era than the agentic era. It's built around a one-time verification. So prove who you are at the start of the journey and then continue. So it is just one point verifications for the users, and then ultimately you can access all these different channels and pathways. Fraud today, however, is continuous, adaptive, and cross channel. It means that defense also needs to be autonomous, contextual, and risk based. So, this is where network based identity signals become much more important. And who has access to that is telcos. So telcos right now have real-time access to this intelligence that most enterprises do not have that kind of access. So they have whether a mobile number is generally associated with a device, they have whether a SIM has recently changed. So all these signals can genuinely help in enterprises and strengthen that, fraud detections without adding unnecessarily layers of complexity and obviously having that, frictionless user experience. So from an IDC perspective, the opportunity is not to replace the existing cybersecurity or identity platforms. It's rather to enrich them with trusted, privacy cautious, network intelligence um, features that ultimately move towards from verifying user wants what we have to that continuous assess whether an interaction still looks legitimate and trustworthy throughout the life cycle.
Wow,
Does
amazing. I
that make
mean,
sense?
the 3 points that you started with, how the whole landscape has changed because things are a lot more industrialized. I like the word because that's how organized things are, right? You have huge teams behind these threats and cyber attacks that we are looking at today. It's not like one man show kind of thing. And then you say that it's more convincing. Yeah, people know everyone else is smart and that they're trying to come up with ways to make it convincing, and like you said, it's also very fragmented. So those three things, yeah, definitely are changing the landscape in a major way. And like what you pointed out, the defenses have to be augmented, they have to be elevated to meet this new environment. And picking up from where you left, you did mention about the traditional methods like OTPs and passwords, right? Which are still from the legacy kind of defenses. So I guess I would like to bring this to Kunal. And Kunal, talking about these OTPs and passwords, we know that everyone notices that these are becoming increasingly cumbersome at combating fraud and also threats. So how can telcos step in here?
You know, thanks, Sarah, for the question. And Masarra really well articulated the problem statement and how the industry is looking at it. If I reflect upon it, few things which you mentioned, right, and in the context of the question, the problem with OTP and password, it's not just about they are cumbersome. It's not about it's just difficult to use, but it's fundamentally broken in today's security model. As you rightfully said, Masarra, right? Fraud is, and if you think about cybersecurity, it's a $10 trillion industry. It's the third largest economy after US and China, right? And the key word becomes is the industrialized fraud, which you mentioned. There are organizations who are sitting behind, which are industrializing SIM swap, social engineering, AIT, artificial traffic inflation, right? And that's really where one-time passwords, OTPs and passwords are becoming more and more unsecure, and they are as secure as the channel which is delivering it. And honestly, these channels have been compromised today. This is the way it's operating today. It is causing a lot more fraud to happen. Now, what happens when telcos come in? I think Masarra touched upon it, but pretty much if you think about it, every enterprise is building solutions for mobility first environments. I think I've mentioned this in a couple of other talks as well as I can leave my wallet at home, but I'll not leave my phone. My phone has all the information associated with me. Now just imagine the power of that information with mobile network has, where I don't have to wait for an OTP. I don't have to enter a password. The mobile network has information about me which cannot be replicated, which is related to whether the SIM card has been recently swapped, whether my phone number matches my subscriber record, what is the status of my device. These are all things which are carrier grade intelligence, which in a telco industry is highly reliable and extremely difficult to spoof. And most importantly, what Masarra mentioned is during the life cycle of the journey is continuously getting updated. It is live, it is continuous, and it can give information which can be adapted to take actions. At Vonage, what we are looking at is harnessing the power of this network intelligence and abstracting it towards the enterprises and developers. What I mean by that is enterprises and developers do not need to know about what is SIM swap, what is number verify. What we are doing is we are abstracting that complexity and building network-powered solutions so these APIs can drive outcomes rather than being a technology. And another thing to reflect upon what Masarra said is, right, we definitely see this as a tool in the toolkit, and this is an added layer which we can provide as outcomes and as data integrity and data risk decision inputs, so that enterprises, applications, and developers can take better options or decisions, basically. So just to give you an example and make it a little bit more tangible, since we have spoken about one-time password, we have something called Verify solution, and within our Verify solution, we have silent authentication capability. So let me walk you through what happens for an enterprise and an application. Today, you log into a network, you put in your phone number, you get a one-time password, and then you're struggling to flip between the screens, copy that one-time password, put it in a chat window, and hopefully you have not timed out by that time. What we are seeing more and more is enterprises are adopting our Verify solution with silent authentication capability, in which once you put your phone number, without any friction, the enterprise will get the phone number. They will go back to my carrier. Let's say it's AT&T. It'll go to AT&T, go and say, is this Kunal? Has he moved for a long time? Is he validated or not? And without any friction, I get authenticated. So no more OTPs, no more intercepts, no more social engineering, and it improves my experience with the enterprise. As a side effect for the enterprise, what we have seen is it increases the authentication time, but more importantly, we have seen an uptake of up to 8 to 9% on higher conversion rate. So if you think in the retail context, where you're going to Amazon on the Prime Day and you're doing your shopping and you have to get yourself authenticated and you find a lot of friction and you abandon the cart, no more abandoning of the cart, because it's seamless, it's integrated. And that's really what we are trying to drive. To come back to your question, the way we see as telcos now become not just a connectivity provider, but they become a trusted infrastructure layer where you can bring digital trust into different applications, different verticals. And this is really where we find that it's going to be transformative in the agentic commerce and agentic AI world.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's really interesting because, what you pointed out about carriers, right? And carrier grade intelligence, you call it. Yes. Admittedly, telcos have that intelligence and therefore they have the context. And this ties back to what Masarra was saying that, that intelligence, that information must be continuous. It cannot be one point, right? And, as the user is online and, you know their behavior, you know the past behavior, you know how things are evolving, you know the patterns, and you know if this is legit, if it's not. Yeah, telcos are sitting on that information, and why not tap into that? And like you pointed out, it need not be the only method. It's the tool in the toolkit, right? But it definitely adds a lot to, making the customer journey much more seamless, tapping into that information. But I guess, the crux of this, the technology supporting this would be the APIs at the back end, right? So talking about APIs, okay, when it comes to digital identity protection, how do you see these APIs playing a bigger role in bridging the gap for required identity data?
Yeah, that's a good question, Tara. And if I reflect upon it, right, I think we should unpack on how do the digital identity systems work today. So if you think about today, and again, yesterday's world and what today's world is, right, most of the digital identity systems rely on user providing the data, whether it's a password, whether it's a document, whether it's that one-time passcode, whether it's answer to a question. And whenever user is giving that data, there is a gap that data can be stolen, manipulated, or one point which Masarra made is it's outdated. That's really where network APIs brings a trusted layer within the digital identity system. So again, if you think about digital identity and now think about trust, that's really where the trust layer is coming from network APIs, where intelligence is coming directly from the mobile network. As I said, right, it's about the device, it's about the SIM, it's about the phone number, it's about location, it's about whether you're connected or not, right? And that's really what changes or amplifies how digital identity systems can apply this trust from telcos, and particularly the network APIs. And if I reflect upon it, right, it's three things. Number one, it's continuous verification. It's due through the life cycle, not just when you're logging in. It's when you change any of your credentials. It's when you're doing a high value transaction. It's when you're resetting your password. Now, there is a continuous verification which the telcos and network APIs can bring in, which gives the entire journey a lot more secure and trust, basically. It's becoming digital trusted layer. The second one is it creates a much stronger decision engine making without giving too much personal information. I'll give a few examples, right? If you think about banking, and I was talking to a bank in Europe, and they are simply asking for, hey, within the agentic world, the AI agent can actually make a call and say, I am Kunal, and it's actually talking to the bank on my behalf. And again, synthetic identities and social engineering and deepfakes can do that a lot. Now, the banks are going and saying, I just want to find out, is Kunal actually in this location? Is he actually on a call with me? So they are not asking about too many details about me, but they are giving these signals based on which they can make a better decision. So now what they have done is they have a stronger risk decision engine based on these inputs. And the last part becomes is, as I mentioned, carrier grade intelligence. It can be standardized and scaled across industries. So it's not just about the banks. It's not just about fintech, but it's for healthcare, retailers, digital platforms. Now you do not have to have bespoke solutions because everybody is using the network, and it becomes a horizontal layer, which now you can scale vertically and drive value vertically. And that's really where the opportunity changes from. It's not about can this person prove who they are, but does telco network give you the confidence that every interaction is legitimate and it is not exposing you to any risk or fraud? And that's really where Vonage is using the network path solutions, using the power of network APIs, converting into outcomes. And this is not a theoretical concept. We already have enterprises who are actually using our solutions and seeing the benefit of our verify and identity insight solutions to reduce authentication latency, to eliminate social engineering without adding friction to the users.
Wow. You addressed the pain points that we started this conversation with. We wanted something that is continuous, right? So continuous verification is so important. And then the risk decision making. I think trying to basically value or evaluate the level of risk. So when it comes to I think we've discussed this before. The AI engines, they can the agentic AI can impersonate a person, and then so how do you handle that risk? So basically, you need an intelligence layer that goes beyond relying on the customer or the user themselves, right? Because they provide the information. So, and you don't know if that's a real person or fake person. And we have, like what you mentioned, the deep fakes at this time. So you really are, at a point, we are at a point in time where it becomes very difficult for us to ascertain whether this is legit, if it's not. And using network data, we are circumventing all that because that is truth. That is, that is truth, and you can't replicate that. You can't just make up that intelligence, right? So, and then you brought up the question about scalability and standardization, which is not available in the traditional or legacy methods, which is now available when we use APIs and network intelligence. And I guess that basically, we've looked at the solution portion of this, but let's look at the market and the adoption of this technology in the market. And I think I'm going to come back to Masarra here. So what needs to happen across the industry to ensure these APIs become more standardized, interoperable, and scalable? I mean, in practice, right? We've talked about it theoretically, but what's your
Yes.
view on that?
I'm gonna build a lot on what Kunal have talked about. It's for those APIs to actually scale, that I believe the industry needs to solve three things. And first and the most priority is standardization, and then interoperability and commercial simplicity. I think for us to bring all these use cases to life, the first priority is standardization. So enterprises do not want to integrate separately with every single operator in every country. They need a common APIs definitions, consistent developer documentation, um, predictable data formats, if I can say, a clear authentication models. So really to provide that reliable service expectation globally. And this is where to your point you touched on, this is where the industry initiative around Kamara Open Gateway, GSMA Open Gateway matters, because they created a common foundation for exposing network capabilities in a way that both enterprises and developers can actually consume it. And the second part of things is the interoperability aspects, because I believe we brought in that e-commerce examples and the banking examples. So, you know, whether it's a bank, a fintech, a retail, or a digital platform, they all should be able to use identity related APIs, such as we touched on, number verification or SIM swap across multiple operators and multiple regions without rebuilding the solutions every time. So if each operator exposes these capabilities differently, we're going to run into the same initiatives or the same scenarios we run to before, as in it wouldn't scale, it would be too complex, and we will just be limited to that piloting phase. So the third priority when it comes to that is the commercial scalability. Because we deal with some global enterprises who might have, global consumers, enterprises need transparent pricing, they need clear use case packaging, they need ease in testing environments with piloting, and a simple procurement process. So if every market has its own pricing contracts and compliance and availability trust, the adoptions will be really limited, if I can say, and it wouldn't really pass through the piloting phase. So to move from that, from experimentation to, mainstream scalable global adoptions, these APIs need to be easy to buy, easy to test, and easy to scale. So there's like a trust dimension layer into it. So when it comes to identity and privacy, especially with the identity APIs, it really involves a lot of sensitive signals. So enterprises need like clarity on the consent side of things, the privacy, the data dimension, the regulatory compliance and accountability. And this is especially important in sectors such as the banking and finance, healthcare, the public services and the public sectors. So in my own view, the technology alone is one part of things to answer, but the real scaling challenge is a full ecosystem execution. So everybody, the operators, the CPaaS providers, the cloud platforms, the aggregators, the standard bodies, and also the enterprise spires are all need to align around one simple model. So if the industry gets that right, then I believe network APIs are gonna come, a trusted identity and fraud prevention layer that is embedded into the enterprise security and customer experience workflows. Indeed.
Indeed. And I guess, digital identity concerns everyone. And like you pointed out, the ecosystem, everyone in the ecosystem must come together, collaborate to make this happen. And I guess there's already a lot of progress that we are seeing, right? Like, starting from, all the initiatives around Kamara. So, what do you guys think? What about the progress that we have had so far?
So for the Kamara progress, indeed, it did have, if I can believe off the top of my head, I think we have now 78% that Kamara operators have signed with Kamara. MOUs, I'm trying to remember some numbers. I was just like running through them. The most picked up cases, the silent authentications, silent fraud prevention, I believe. So SIM swap and number verification. I think from a deployment standpoint, There are around 610 deployment for the Kamara Open gateways, mostly and dominantly by the SIM swap and the number verification, as it found itself such a nice use case. I think, Kunal, you touched on this, how it's like a smoother customer experience, saving that 20 seconds of, copying a code and putting it into the one of the channels. It's much more frictionless. And this is, I believe, what network APIs really bring into the market is like much smoother customer experience and reducing that friction. From a regional perspective and operators perspective, actually Europe and APAC shortly are heading this deployments. I believe Europe, um, I don't remember, but it's around 30% of deployments or 46% of all deployments that is happening for the Kamara Open Gateway initiative. And one of the top operators within that is Vodafone, Telefonica, and Orange. So especially Vodafone is really dominating the network APIs deployments globally as well. From industry perspective or enterprises buyers perspective, I see to your point, Kunal, I'm seeing, the financial industry is picking up this fraud and authentications APIs a lot. Um, could be also retail and e-commerce and transportations and marketing follow after. But I really one of the messages I'm trying to convey is that, the opportunities for telco is not, to become just another standalone fraud vendor. I believe it's really to become like how do you put it? Like a trusted signal layer inside the digital identity ecosystem. So if all the operators collaborate together and they can like expose the network APIs and provide that network intelligence in a much more, standardized, privacy safe, developer friendly way, they're really gonna become, they're gonna have a much bigger role in the digital trust world, especially to your point when you mentioned the agentic era, as I believe, and I don't want to consume too much. If we have one consumer, one end user, but we're gonna have, for example, agents that represents me, one that is gonna book my appointment, one is gonna, schedule a nail appointment maybe, or one that's going to purchase an outfit on an e-commerce, then telcos would have the opportunity to verify if this individual user of this identity, let's say, not just user, is legitimate throughout the cycle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Chara, if I may add right to your question about how's the adoption, I completely agree with Masarra in terms of the numbers and the excitement which is there on the telco side. I think I'm going to be a little controversial and say technologies are, in my past career, technologies are great, but unless and until they can be operationalized and commercialized, they die. So I'm going to be a little controversial and say two areas which we as an ecosystem need to think about is how do we drive simplification? It's not about the APIs, it's about the outcomes, and that's what we're focusing on. And the second part, which was briefly touched, but I'm going to emphasize on that, is commercial innovation. We cannot be thinking about this as APIs and transactions. We really need to think about how this can be truly in SaaS world, truly have commercial innovations. So enterprises do not feel the friction of consuming this as a per API transaction cost. And there has to be a commercial innovation, particularly in the agentic and the token worlds, basically, right? I'm not trying to throw the buzzwords, but we really need to think about the commercial innovation to drive scale. So speed, simplicity, and scale.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I really like the term that Masarra said earlier, trusted digital layer. So that's where the telcos sit, and they're going to be a huge contribution. But I think, Kunal brought up, the core consideration, which is, you have to put it into practice, but you have to make it seamless, you have to make it practical, otherwise, nobody's going to adopt it, and the push is not going to be there. It's not going to be scalable. And, so we are all in it together. I guess, the collaboration has to happen, the translation has to happen. And, finally the consumers and businesses must see this translating into value and helping them to bring in their dollars. Otherwise, what Kunal said, yes, technology will remain as a technology and be overtaken by another technology. But I guess, I saw remarkable numbers, that Masarra has given us today. I think 78% of telcos, I think that's huge. And we see big names, spearheading this. So I think we are all headed, towards great success in this area. And I guess with that, we have come to the end of the session. So thank you so much, Masarra and Kunal, for taking your time today, to join us in this session and talking about this is a very, very interesting topic. Everyone relates to this topic. We are all consumers at the end of the day. And this fraud landscape is always evolving, and people are looking out into methods to mitigate the threats and also ensure that their experiences remain or become better over time. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Tara.
Thank you, Tara, for having us. Masarra, great talking, and we'll talk to you guys later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. And to everyone tuning in, thank you guys for listening. If you want to learn more, visit the links that are you can see the links below, and follow us for more updates and insights as we continue to uncover the latest in technology and telecommunications. See you in our next session. Bye-bye.